So I starting to do the alignment, and some of the preliminary setup information says turn both VFO trimmer capacitor screws through two holes on the left side of the VFO clockwise until just snug, then turn each capacitor screw counterclockwise 1/4 turn. And so I attempt to do that. First of all, it's very difficult to get anything in there to where it's on the side of the VFO and just almost impossible to get to. I finally got something in there, and I felt like I was tightening them, but I wasn't sure. And so I said, well, what the heck, I'm going to go ahead and finish the process. And tuning this thing up, I was able to get the calibration on the upper end of the scale. As I come back towards the lower end of the scale, the oscillator would get to, when I got down to the zero side, I couldn't even hear it. I was using a shortwave receiver, actually using my ham rig to listen to the oscillator. They tell you that the VFO signal may be tuned in a general coverage receiver at 5,000 kilohertz for the 500 dial setting and at 5,500 kilohertz for the 0 dial setting. So I used my receiver, and I couldn't get it to tune correctly on the lower end of this scale, and that's what those two trimmers are for. Just wouldn't act right. So I kept looking, trying to see in there. It's also at an angle that you can't see. I kept trying to see in there, and I couldn't see any screw slots on those trimmers. And the more I looked, I said, it looks like to me the screws are gone. And so once again, I had to take this VFO out, and you haven't lived till you take a VFO out of one of these HW-101s. Well, the front panel's got to come off again. This is about the third time I've taken it off for various reasons. And take it completely out and disassemble it, and sure enough, I hope you can see these. The screws are missing from the trimmers. Somebody must have backed them out too far. I expected to find them inside the VFO rattling around, but they're not in there. So I don't know why, but I don't know how whoever did it, did they take it apart? I just don't. There's enough holes around on the side of this thing. I guess they could have shook them out and then weren't able to get them back in. I don't know. So now I've got to find some appropriate screws, because they can't be too long, and it looks like about a 440 thread. The other thing got me on to the screws must be missing was I could stick a tuning tool in there and press on those little plates, and the frequency would change. And I said, oh, those plates are not secure, and therefore the screws are gone. So here we are. Now I've got to find some screws that'll fit in there and work. And I've got a box full of old trimmers. Maybe I can find some screws that'll work. Well, this radio has been a monster. It wouldn't receive at all, so I got to working on it. The first thing I did was remove this little preamp that they had stuck in there to give it some more gain, because nothing was getting past it. After I took that out, it showed some signs of recovery. I put a signal generator on the input of it, and I could hear the signal generator in the speaker. So I traced it all the way through, and I could, with my signal tracer, and it seemed the signal was getting all the way through the chain. So I just assumed that the chain was okay and it must be alignment. Well, I fooled with this thing for about 2 days, changing tubes, working with alignment. It's a dog to a line, I think. And couldn't improve it, so I resisted doing voltage checks. These things are hard to do voltage checks on because they, even though they have x-ray views of the boards, it's hard to figure out where the test points are, and you're constantly changing the position of the radio, and it's just aggravating. So finally, though, I started to do it, and immediately, and there was a resistor that I wasn't getting signal past resistor, and so I wanted to test that resistor, and when I probed the end of it, it was disconnected. Somebody had clipped it, must have clipped it so they could test it, isolated away from everything else in the circuit. Never soldered it back. So I soldered that back, and things seemed to improve a little bit. I continued to do voltage checks, and I ran up on another, was not getting B plus to one of the tubes, and that B plus went through a transformer. I said, oh my God, I bet this transformer was bad. But traced that to a bad solder joint, and after I hooked that up, it came alive. So I have a live receiver now. There's still a lot of things that needs to be done. I haven't even started on the transmitter. The way these things are designed, and I'll have to give it to the Heath engineers. I had some superb engineering going on here. They borrow most of the tuned circuits out of the transmitter, or vice versa. They constantly running a signal up through the transmitter tuned circuits and back down, and it's it's really complicated the way they do things. But anyway, I got it, finally got it aligned, and still very low gain, but reading on these things, they just were not very hot front ends on these receivers. So I'm going to play with it a little bit more, and if the receiver don't work, the transmitter's not going to work, because they share too many items. And I'm going to start here on the transmitter here soon and see if it'll fire up. Well, I've got a interesting problem with my HW-101. All of a sudden, when it's when you turn it on, after a while, 2-3 minutes or so, I haven't really timed it, both of the transmit receive relays pull in just on their own. So what's causing that? Here's one of the transmit receive relays. There's another one inside of the PA cage, but the box circuit is controlled by these two tubes right here, V12 and V17. So I'm suspecting something going on there, and it's something that's, when it heats up, it's doing that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace these tubes one by one, see if that might cure the problem. and if not, we're going to have to try some other things. Here's a schematic. This is in the HW-101. Let me move the light over here a little. Hopefully we can. Some kind of. Probably going to be hard to see that. But what happens, V17, the audio signal from the microphone comes into V17 and is amplified, and then it's rectified by that diode there on the output. So you got a DC voltage coming out. That DC voltage is fed into V12, and when the voltage gets up to a certain point, it pulls in both of the relays right here. There is a Zener diode in the cathode of this V12 that holds this tube at biased at 15 volts, are essentially shut off, and then when the voltage from V17 overcomes it on the grid there, it turns it on, and therefore it turns on the relays. Now in push to talk, there's a line that comes from the push to talk switch to the cathode, and when you do that, it grounds the cathode through a resistor, and that turns the tube on, which turns the relays on. So I'm going to try the tubes first, and then we'll take some voltage measurements and see what's changing after it heats up. So I replaced the 6EA8. I replaced the V12, the 6EA8, and just turned it on from a totally cold state. And let's see how long it takes for the relays to kick in or not. So I replaced the 6EA8 V12, and this radio's been on for about 30 minutes and has not activated by itself. Well, I think this HW-101 is finished. I have to tell you a little story, embarrassing story, but I don't know, there's probably at least a dozen things I fixed on this radio, bad soldered joints, tubes, just a little bit of everything. Took me a long time to get all the bugs out of it, and the problem was that I couldn't get this thing to put out more than 50 watts. I spent a lot of time doing the resistor check that they have in the manual, checking all the voltages that they had in the manual, and then started checking individual resistors, trying to figure why this thing wouldn't put out more than 50 watts. And stupid me, I didn't pay any attention to the plate current. It finally hit me, wait a minute, this little meter on this radio has each division on it. It serves as an S meter as well, but the divisions on it are 50 milliamps. And I was pegging this meter on the highest, which is like 300 milliamps. And I got to thinking, but wait a minute, the plates of these finals have 800 volts on them, and I'm drawing about 300 milliamps. Something going on here. This thing ought to be putting out more than 50 watts. So here again, I spent a lot of time hunting, trying to figure out why it wouldn't put out over 50 watts. Well, I was using this MFJ antenna tuner watt meter. I've had it for years, and it's always been accurate. I mean, it seemed to work just fine, but it wouldn't read but about 50 watts. So I said, well, wait a minute, maybe the meter's bad. So I drug out an old Drake antenna tuner I had, and sure enough, this thing is putting out right around 200 watts to this unit. So I spent a lot of time trying to chase a problem I didn't have because of my stupidity. But it's working now, and I'm really impressed with these radios. The sensitivity seems to be very good on the receiver, and good selectivity. These were just plain old good radios back in their day for the price, and I think the number I saw, I believe, was they figure that Heath, well, I think Heath's own records show they sold around 40,000 of these HW-101s. A lot of them out there. You can pick them up cheap, especially if they're not working. And so I'm proud of this. In some of the earlier videos, I rebuilt the power supply, and it's working great. It looks great. This radio, I've got it off of the floor, been sitting on the floor of a basement for probably 30 years, and there's just really no scratches on it. It's a beautiful radio. So I'm kind of pleased with it. I'm going to use it a little while, and I'll probably set it up on a shelf and never touch it again before I die, but enjoying it now.